Hi, my name is Tony. I'm the dev. My name is Tony Sage, and it's Sage Dev. Yeah, I totally didn't do that right. That's okay. We are pretty much dev complete, which means that we have some things to talk about. First of all, if we're dev complete locally, that means we need to start thinking about maintenance and how we're going to handle this in the future. That means establishing GitHub in such a way that we can track changes, we can have PRs to this GitHub repo, we can talk about access and GitHub Actions, which is one piece. The other thing we need to think about is deploying and how we're going to build this so that it can deploy and automatically deploy as part of a CI pipeline out to our AWS instance. So to start, let's look at my AWS setup. Let me open up a new window here. So AWS is as complicated as you want it to be. There's a lot of training and things you can do out there to establish how to set something up and what to do. But at its baseline, to make it work, you need to set up a new account. I set up an account under Sage Dev because I have an alternate account that I already had. But when we're talking about deploying and hosting on AWS, we need to first think about our structure, how we're going to build this, and how far we're going to extend the capabilities on this. So because this was built in a Docker container, we have some options for how we want to deploy this. I don't think in a real world productionalized site, we would probably have a dev branch, so a dev environment that we would have this on so that we could do live dev and restrict access to a set number of IPs. Or if you're working for a larger company, you might have a VPN and you could set an IP range. Because this is just for now going to be my portfolio work and I am the only one that's going to be supporting it, we're going to skip a dev environment. If we get more buy-in and people really like it, which who knows what could happen, but if we get a lot of buy-in and people start leveraging it and we don't want to risk production, then we could have a lower environment like stage or dev where we could preset, we're introducing a new feature. Let's put this in an environment so that this can be tested ahead of deploying it to production and potentially breaking our production. So for now, we're only going to have a production instance in our AWS. So if I go to my dashboard, which of course I went about it the wrong way. Yeah, there we go. So I've already established a new thing. I have 2FA set up. That's a necessity. You could even do it through your cell phone if you're so inclined. For me, having this in email because it's not part of my personal life. This is just my professional life, so I like to keep those separate. So let me add a new. Let me close out some tabs. I've got too many things working here, and I'll walk through that. So AWS is a bit persnickety. It's going to want one email account for attribution, and if you somehow lose your account credentials or that client decides not to buy in and it goes away, you can't reintroduce your email account. If you've lost your attribution, it's gone. Okay, so now that I'm on AWS, we can set up new AWS components. If you haven't played with this before, it's vast. There's a lot of things we can do here, but most of what we're going to do is going to be either in EC2 or in ECS EKS. So in EC2 would be basically standing up a flat space for your code to run. There is some database built into that, and all of those things exist, but at its heart, an EC2 is just a place for your app server. It is useful if you want to extend your site into other places, or if you want to have it in several different regions, to set it into EC2. But because this is something that we've built into a Docker container, I'm thinking that we do in ECS or EKS. So that's a container service. This will extend. So it takes our app and hosts it in its entirety in a space. And then if you need additional resources, it will extend that functionality and allow it to expand. This also, you could talk about EKS. Same thing, this is using Kubernetes. Kubernetes is just a system so that you can handle your administration as code. So if I wanted to change multiple environments that are hosted all at once, you could have a Kubernetes cluster set that when you introduce code with Terraform or something, it will automatically update those environments for you, which would be necessary if we're going to do long-term support on this. I'm not sure what exact approach I want to take yet, but setting this up is a big part of the development lifecycle if you want to actually maintain your app and not just have it sit there gathering dust. So because Claude has all of my context, and I don't really feel this is a development kind of thing, so I'm going to move this into Sonnet, and I'm just going to ask it. So based on the, you know what, I'm going to use the mic. Let's do things the way that I would do them in real life. Based on our current code base and what we've established in our local build steps, we're planning how we're going to deploy this to AWS. I don't know if this is best served in a Docker container in an ECS solution, or if this is an EKS thing that we should do. Maybe we should just set it into an EC2. What do you think? Plan, submit. So you could use, I like Gemini for planning more than I like Claude for planning. But because we have all of the context in our code base, and our code base is readily accessed by Claude, this is a good place for that to live. And otherwise, if I was starting from zero and didn't have my code in place, I would probably use Gemini to come up with a plan. Not that one's really any better than the other, it's just this has all of my reference points. Sonnet 5 is brand new, but it has a self-checking logic built into it. So it should set up some different agents and using those sub-agents, establish what it's doing and second guess itself. It's supposed to be self-learning. And I'm hoping that using that as opposed to our Opus, which is our code development side, would give us a better overall result when it comes to how we would implement it. But while we're talking about that, we have done a final run against our code base to make sure that it was meeting code standards. This final run was trying to do what our tools like GitHub Copilot, if you do have GitHub set up instead of Claude, or one of our other quality control gates would do, was trying to do that in advance so that when we set up our PR pipelines and our CI pipelines, that will already be established. But while it's spinning, based on our current soft quiche, Claude, you're so weird. We can set some things. Oh, let's just see what it says. So, current image storage is written on local disk, which won't work in Fargate. Fargate is one of the systems that is available on AWS. Should this be S3 migration for the public disk to be scoped in this deployment effort or handled as a separate follow-up? Yeah. So it's thinking ECS. Let's see what else it says. Should CI/CD pushing the ECR updates to ECS service be part of this same plan? Separate follow-up. That is what we're going to do after we've established how this is going to live in AWS. We will then build our CI pipelines. So while it's working, what I was going to show you in GitHub, there's a lot of things that we can establish from a baseline. One of those is setting our pull requests and how those are handled. If you go to rules, we can create specific rules for a specific branch or subset of branches. All right, it looks like it's got a plan. Sorry, I'm pivoting back and forth. That's not good for a video, but that's how it works to be real life. Only runs locally via Lando Docker Compose. Yes, I know that. There's no existing AWS development tooling in the repo, no Docker file. For production, no CI/CD, no IaC. Before writing any of that, we need to settle the fundamental question: EC2, ECS, EKS. EKS with our establishing the, it's going to give me a reason. That's even better. So if we have Kubernetes in-house or we want to maintain a Kubernetes cluster, which is a level of expertise that I just don't have when it comes to hosting platforms, then we would set it up. But without having one, it's a labor of effort that we're not going to take. Raw EC2 would mean that we are rolling all of the pieces, which is what I was saying. I don't really want to do that. ECS gives you free deployment, health check based replacement, rolling deploys. It can stand up a new Docker container essentially, and the old one can still be living in production, and then you can just swap, which is really good for blue-green, especially if we're not going to have multiple environments in our AWS, which I just don't want to pay for. So ECS Fargate, no cluster capacity instance management at all. The operational simplicity outweighs Fargate's modest price premium over self-managed EC2. Okay, so it's going to say the plan, theoretically, is to do an ECS Fargate service. Let's extend this. Web task behind an ALB auto-scaled. Reverb, ECS Fargate service behind web sockets don't work well in that. And Queue Worker, which is our artisan, separate Fargate service, no load balancer scaled on Redis. So when we're done, we should see what this is telling me is we'll have a Fargate service, we'll have a Queue Worker ECS Fargate service, and we'll have the Elasticache for Redis set on those. So maybe 2 services for this app that will both need to be set into more than one region so that you have coverage. So if everybody's in US East 1 is one of the big United States regions, if East 1 goes down, which has happened, then we would have a backup. So we're looking at essentially 4 different ECS Fargate services that we need to establish on AWS. Existing config supports that split, blah, blah, blah. Write a production Docker file with PHP app, npm run build, and copies of public build. Push image to ECR. And then determine 3 ECS task definitions and 3 services. So it's going to be 3 services in total. And I think I'm on board with this so far, including where the images are going to live, S3 migrations in scope of this effort. So it says that we need to target an S3 instead of local disk when we productionalize, since Fargate has a non-shared storage. Fargate is just a place where you drop docs, right? So this is saying that because it has a non-shared storage in Fargate, we need to start replicating that locally. CI/CD is out of scope for now. Auth approach for manual AWS deploys isn't settled finally. So once a Docker file and task definitions exist, verification would be build the image locally, run it against the Redis, confirm boot, then deploy to a staging ECS cluster and hit the ALB health check endpoint before cutting over to DNS. Okay, I am fine with all of that. So let's just accept it. It's going to just set up a plan. And what I'm going to do is take that plan and drop it into our docs. So I don't think it's going to do anything in this run, but it was talking about taking our file images out of a public file directory that's set in our Docker container and actually having it separate. When this is done, I think I'm going to have it generate a PUML doc or 2 to demonstrate how this deploy is going to work. UML is either a sequence diagram or a visual representation of this that can be committed to code. And if you've set up plant UML before or a UML document before, it just means that you have this scalable thing that lives in the code base that you can show to a client. You could show in presentations. You could say, this is how the logic is actually working behind the scenes on this. And having that set into the repo means that it also is referenced by Claude. So let's see what it's doing. It is going to change our setup for how we're storing image. And it's going to set the for to use config-driven disk name. So instead of it just referencing public, it's going to reference the file system's public disk logic, which is set into our config, this file systems.php. So it's turning something that was a static reference that we were using to dev locally, and it's building it in preparation for this setup where we're going to need to tie it to a different ECS cluster. It was talking about using an S3. We could do that too. So it does not have a S3 file system driver right now. So it's going to go out with Composer. It's going to set that as a requirement. And when that's done, images should be hosted in, I think this is not a legitimate S3. If it is, then we'll have to stand that up first, which is a pain point, but something that we would have to do. I also want to see if, as part of this process, we can do things the new way of doing things. So the old way of doing things, let me walk back. The old way of doing things would be I would go to ECS and I would manually create a new ECS instance. So I can go to my clusters and I can create a new cluster. I can set the security for all of the access. So it's probably user-driven security. I could set the connections, what is and is not connecting, and then set any other resources. So if I had an S3 bucket where I could drop files or something like that, would be something that I set up separately in an S3. I know I'm using a lot of terms, but I'm assuming that some people have some understanding of this and don't want to really drag it down too far. So if I wanted to create a new file system, bucket, whatever, we could just set it here. So we would create a place to land our images, which would be in this S3. We would have a place to set our actual Dockerized, containerized website, and that would be the ECS. But with the way that AI is working, and with some of our things that are already available to us, which is the infrastructure as code, like Terraform, I think that when we get a solid plan and it's run all of this in a good space, we can have Terraform automatically establish those things for us. So if we need 2 containers, oh, it said 3. We'll see what we actually use. If we need 3 ECS containers and 1 S3 bucket to store the images, I don't think we need to have more than that. Then we have 4 pieces that we could have AI set into code. And when we're running our build in our GitHub Actions, it would actually go out and connect and create those or update them if they already exist. Then all we need to do is handle the permissions around it. Instead of us having to go out and manually create all of these things, we could have it do it for us. And when we need to tweak and adjust, that's something we could use Claude to help us do, versus me going out and just authoring a whole bunch of stuff and maintaining it until the end of time. I'd like our AI solution to also establish those things. So it has done some things. So it is setting a file system disk. This is in our env, right? Right now it's hitting public. We would eventually have our AWS credentials potentially in here. This is just our example, not what's in production. We have a new FlyStream AWS S3 so that we can store and extract our images from an S3 instance. And that's been set up. We have a file system public disk config. We already looked at that. That is set in the actual file systems.php. So if we have more than one instance, we want different places that we're storing these, we could have them in different S3s. If we had a stage version and a prod version, we didn't want them to mix, we could have a public disk for each. Right now, it's taking it from the env file. Oh, pardon me. Taking it from the env file. So when we productionalize this, it's first saying, I'm not in local, I am in public because of the build. We could also, in our env, so it's not actually in the code base. Eventually that env should not be in the code base. We'd want that to be in the GitHub secrets or however we're going to establish that. But those env files can live in our hosting platform or can live in Bitbucket or GitHub. Goodness gracious. Can live in GitHub so that when it does the build, it establishes all of those things. And honestly, when we're productionalizing this, we probably need those envs in AWS and in GitHub. And we need to be able to pull the envs locally when we do a build locally. We probably just need to get rid of the env reference out of the root entirely when we're done. So it's made those changes to the files. Pint clean, Laravel full feature suite, including image upload, map, and GitHub Actions and stuff were deferred. We're not going to do that right now. I'm interested in a Terraform type deployment, something that we can leverage in the code base to build our EKS or ECS environments with code in the GitHub Actions. I want to we still haven't built our GitHub Actions to build it yet, but I'd like to set a framework. I should be talking to it. That would be so much more effective while I'm on video. But I'd like to set up a framework in the same repo that we can leverage and execute on a release in Git. And ignore my typos. I do. So this is a big piece that people lose. Most developers that are just doing their code don't think about how we're going to actually productionalize this. I have worked with different hosting environments. I like Acquia for my Drupal development. I've used more than one different one, so that there's a lot going on there. Yeah, we don't have Terraform or Docker files. So I've used different platforms that are hosted platforms, and the upside of that is you don't have to maintain them regularly. The hosting platform will. But if we're building this as an independent developer and we're trying to keep costs low, I want to have a way for us to maintain this as seamlessly as possible without overcomplicating. So we should be able to establish this, all of this in Terraform. And then when we deploy, GitHub can handle some of the logic that we're hiding from the user. And then AWS can actually handle our connections. So once how would you like this stored locked for this project? Self-maintained, managed, remote state, S3 bucket for site files, DynamoDB table for locking, standard AWS native approach. No extra vendor, cents a month versus using Terraform Cloud. Does not work from GitHub Actions. Each CI run would lose state. Yeah, I like DynamoDB. That is fine. How many environments should the Terraform support? Single environment prod. Should GitHub Actions authenticate to AWS to run Terraform? IAM role. That is the business. So OIDC is your standard connections login process, right? And then the IAM role is I'm setting up a actual user in AWS for GitHub Actions to access, and it will set permissions for how it can build. That's a super brief summary. Do you already have a domain Route 53 hosted for the app, or should you plan to skip for the first cut? Skip. We would need to set a DNS alias and a hosting platform, which we don't have yet. Okay, let's let it think. So while it's loading, it's running right now still. A couple upsides to this. If we plan out this architecture in code and we use a solution like Terraform, not only do we not have to manually author anything in GitHub other than securing the users and saying, hey, this app has access to this, and this user is able to build, and this is, other than establishing those things, everything else can be done in code. So moving forward, if we do want to extend this, it'll be much more straightforward to do. It's also something that we can set our deployment pipeline into docs. So I document everything, I over-document. Because theoretically, if this thing is awesome and people want to implement it and use it, it could go to a customer. So I could sell this. Probably not in reality, because I'm recording my entire process and it's not. But if we do want to sell this, we want to provide thorough documentation. We want to have rendered images. We want to have an ARC42. We want to explain how our deploy pipeline works, how we're securing it in AWS. We want to keep all of that infrastructure in a place that's easy to reference and document. And my favorite thing that I do on a daily basis with Claude is auto document. Nothing has saved me more time in my workflow. So I've worked this stuff for 10 years. And nothing has saved me more time. Like, I do code, I'll dig into the files and I'll do my own code fixes 90% of the time. It's just, hey, where is this error? And then I'll fix it or tweak it. But having the ability for it to, yeah, all right, go ahead and set up my flows, fine. But having it so that AI can read through a Drupal module or something, summarize how it works, and explain it in a manner that I ask it to. I want to have this available for a client who doesn't understand our back-end infrastructure or much about the systems. That is where I save all of my time. S3 storage migration groundwork is already merged. So we did that. File system driver was installed for S3 fly system. The next step is standing up the actual deployment machinery. I finally caved and told it it can do my CI pipe. It's not going to set them on GitHub. I'm going to have to do that. So we're going to do stage backend DB, DynamoDB. That's fine. Not Terraform Cloud because it costs even more over time. Prod environment for now, no staging, module layer stays the same, agnostic. So we can add another one later, which is, of course, that should be a simple thing. AWS auth from CI, GitHub, OIDC, AEM rule. And the domain TLS is not set right now. It's going to just the regular judgment calls, also known as technical debt, that we'll have to fix potentially. 2 roles, one Terraform role and a deploy role for GitHub that we need to establish. OIDC trusted scope in a GitHub environment named production. ECS run tasks is now going to be built into our GitHub release workflow so that when it runs, we have to trigger it. So ECS tasks, we need to set AWS access key and secret into our GitHub repo, which we can do. Redis and Elasticache get no SSM debug path in this pass. Would need its own module and security group. Okay. So all of this is about the deployment tooling and not part of the local dev loop. That's fine. Docker file locally and run it. Okay. So far, we've changed some of our local setup so that it's easier for it to establish some kind of deploy process to an ECS instance. It looks like it's going to stand up more than one ECS instance in the build pipe. We will have, let's see what it's doing. It's going to get me some local tools so that it's easier for us to establish this. So it's going to set our Docker container so that it's prepared for Terraform. Terraform command not found. And it's going to install Terraform. And we're not using Terraform Cloud, which is a very common way of doing it. We're just going to use our DynamoDB and S3. So yeah, we'll let it spin and see what it comes up with in the code base. We still need to establish these things in GitHub. So while it's doing that, since we're going to be talking about these pipelines, we might as well set some rules. So I have in GitHub, when you are using this at a team level and not just you, we can set rule sets. I like to call certain branches protected. When we do that, and I'm going to Which ones can bypass? None. I don't want anyone to bypass it. But I can set a target branch. So I want my default branch is... Actually, let's be more descriptive than that. Right now I have a... Let's keep myself honest. Right now I have a develop branch and a main branch. I want to protect both of those branches. So I want it to be develop and main. And I need to quote those. So this means that this is going to run when somebody is trying to do something to develop or main. And I had a period because I'm a doofus instead of a comma. Live demo. Develop main. Okay. So this should set this rule for those branches. We are going to... We need to have them successfully deployed into a ref that matches this rule. Stage commits. Claude is right now doing my brew and setting up my Docker. That's why it asked me that. I want it to go through code scanning through CodeQL. This is provided, but this is trying to set our quality of life for code. We can request Copilot code review. I don't think that this is going to work because I don't have a Copilot set up. We'll see what happens. But what we're doing here is saying when somebody creates a PR to one of our protected branches, we want to make sure that it goes through certain acts. I'm not going to require an approval because it's just going to be me, but I am the code owner. Require approval for most recent reviewable push. Require conversation resolution. And I'm going to just do squashing. What this is doing is allowing me to say, hey, when somebody, if say I had a team of 6, when somebody from that team creates a PR, are they going to be able to merge it without going through these gates? Do they need an approval? Are they going to have to jump through a couple hoops, make sure that it meets code standards, make sure that we have all of our linters run? Because locally you can just skip those with a no verify. That's a standard. So we assume that someone's going to get lazy one day or be in a hurry and skip them. So we need them to run in our pipeline or in our actions before we actually approve it. I want to see that the linters ran, and I want to see that they all came back clean. So this is something that you do most of the time. I've used a similar setup for us to allow our CI workflow actions. So I set this wrong. I don't know how I've set this wrong. Develop and main. You think that would be pretty straightforward. Develop's my default. I can lock it down so that no one can PR into main. But this is an example pattern. Well, I used that pattern. One target is develop. Okay, it's just a bad... We're going to try one more time. I don't think you need quotes. Yeah, why does it have quotes in the comment? You can't... Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So now, all that being said, if I want to... Have we gotten through this yet? Nope. That's part of why I'm leveraging Sonnet instead of Opus or Fable, which I technically still have Fable right now, is because this is a pretty complex ask. So I want to not charge me an arm and a leg. I might go back and have Claude or Fable double check that it's doing what it's supposed to do. But I can also do that myself. I'm a dev. I'm reviewing this stuff at a granular level, not always on video, but I am. So anyway, we set these to active, and in our main settings, we also set this so that you have to be basically me or someone I've invited to my team to actually do it. So that is there. We can also set for our builds, we can say, okay, did this deploy properly? We can set, hey, were these workflow actions completed in here? So this is where you would set those things. So if we look at some of these changes that have already been implemented by Sonnet, I have a new Docker ignore that's removing a lot of the things that we're using locally, like Lando, that we don't want to be in our Docker container, because we're in this thought process, we are containerizing everything when we do a Terraform build in GitHub. This is everything that'll be in our Docker container that'll live out in our EC2 instance. So the first thing to do is remove a lot of those, and then we're creating a Docker file. This is where it'll do its build. So we have Composer saying I'm going to use Composer, I'm going to install my Composer, I'm going to take Alpine, which is my front-end JavaScript library that I'm leveraging for this, and then run an npm CI so that it builds, npm run build. Here's my different run steps. So Nginx, I'm using a free type, I'm using some other buzzwords here. These are a lot of them requirements of our Composer or of our actual setup with Lando. A little bit of both. It's going to take vendor, it's going to create a public build from the assets. This is everything is going to be set in a production-like state. So that's where Tailwind and stuff will inherit some of the vendor, right? So we need to keep vendor in our root. We have the same with public build. And when this is run, we should be seeing all of our production state builds. So Tailwind CSS would compile and be a minimized state with cache breaking on it, things like that. So this is just telling Docker how we want to build the container. And then we have our entry point.shell. I think this is for setting up our Laravel. This is for setting up our Laravel. This is not an image build time. It's the earliest point of real values exist. So migrations are deliberately not run here. They're run as a separate one-off. But this should be when we come in as Docker and build those. We have a lot of our settings that are not delicate in our env. Settings that we have in our config that we want tracked are being added here in the Nginx. Nginx is just one of the pieces of the build requirements that we're leveraging. And then log out. So this is from PHP. So we have our reverb, queue worker, and other pieces are set here, along with setting some basic admin default stuff. Our dub, listeners, how we're setting our Fargate workers, all of that's being set in here. So these are all Docker files, and then we have the Terraform. So these are saying, hey, Docker, we want all of these pieces in place when we build this to deploy. And then Terraform is what's setting up our AWS instances for us, theoretically. So we have IAM policies that's going to set. So when we have like our EC2 accesses, our logging, S3, are we going to create, put, pull, get, all those things? That's all going to be set in here. Then we have deploy role. So we have two roles we're establishing. That was in the initial conversation. So we have a role to build and deploy and one to run. Yeah, that's the Terraform is the access for it to set these things on AWS on our behalf. And then there's the deploy role, letting GitHub Actions actually deploy the build. And then we have our basic settings for Terraform, OIDC connections with a certificate. So we have essentially 4 containers from what I can see here. All these are setting our rules for that deploy. Okay. And then it sets a README, and I'll probably have it set a documentation and included in Claude as well. Necessary licenses, Terraform libraries. You can see this is pretty extensive. So if I was going to build this myself in Terraform, it would take a lot of time and effort. But this is basically setting all of the settings that we would have in AWS into code. And when we have this all documented and established, it'll be much easier for us to maintain, which is why we're doing it this way. And why it's costing me so many changes to my PR and 27,000 tokens. All modules are written. Now it's setting the environment's prod root that wires all of the bits together. So it's setting my variables and outputs for my S3 that's going to exist, setting my ECS cluster, my IAM roles, which obviously I'm going to have to go in and assign those roles, permissions and things in AWS. It's not going to do that for me. So it's just saying we're going to have these here. Okay, so it's given me a lot of context here. And I'm going to build that all into a update for my readmes. So I'm going to do update docs. But set all of the variables, set all the bits and bobs so that it can set up through Terraform our GitHub instance. It containerized everything into the Docker container properly. The next step is to push it out and see what happens on GitHub. I don't see any changes to our GitHub Actions. Let's just see. So it did introduce a release deploy and a Terraform. Okay, so on push to develop, it's going to establish our production infrastructure, Terraform init, Terraform deploy. So this might be something I'd rather have on a PR. Interesting. So it's saying that we want to do a Terraform / path in our GitHub. So have a different like build route. Okay. GitHub branch. And once something merges to that branch, then we set up our AWS Terraform init, Terraform plan, and then add a PR comment from that. And it's doing our CI pipeline on push to develop. So instead of doing these in a PR, which is how I've seen them done before, it looks like it's pre-establishing our artifacts and build-ready assets when we merge to develop, which is fine. I just will need to, when I mark something as release, I'd like it to merge from develop to main. So it'll take a little bit of tweaking. but it seems to be there. So it's creating a deployment infrastructure.md with context about what we've done and how and why. And this is in my docs. Also how we should establish it. So we need to set up multi-AD. I'm not going to set up a second staging environment right now. Tighter read-only GHA Terraform role for PR triggered plans. Okay. It's updated its own docs for reference. Full architecture wire up. Terraform module breakdown, security group dependency, cycle, design notes, and what I'm going to do in the future is probably have it check itself with a bigger model and validate its functionality and if it is going to perform the way that we expect. So when I commit this and push, so I'm going to do a git checkout. 08, establish, deploy, process. When I do commit this and push it, we should see some things start happening. Okay, so it created my branch. So now if I go to my regular code, I have a new branch. I'm going to go ahead and merge this, which now it should pass me through my PR process. I'm probably going to still have to add, let me just do that real quick. So when you do a PR, you can also execute builds, deployment builds. I think that because it built them into a PR to develop here, I don't need to establish those in the PR rules. Usually I would do them in the rules and they would run independently. But let's just see what happens when I do a merge. There we go. Now I can push. There we go. Now I have changes. I can do a pull request to dev. So now it's going to, yep. So the first thing it's going to do is go through the different builds. So I don't have those established yet. When I do have this set, I don't want to accidentally expose them on a video or something, but when I do have this set, it should take those credentials and use it to start Terraform process. And it will go through the AWS credentials and establish them through OIDC and all of those things. But because we haven't set those credentials yet, that one's not going to run. The other one is our CI quality. And if we look at all of our actions, there should be one that ran for me creating the branch. I'll have to look at that. But when you establish this, it should do all of your linters and things when you merge a PR to dev. If I don't have that yet, I need to establish that. It also looks like when I merge to dev, it's going to establish our prod ready state. I think I'm going to update that so that it's when I merge dev to main. And main can be our productionalized branch. And from main, we can then do a CI pipe out and deploy to our EC2 or ECS structures. Anyway, we'll follow up when I get that all hooked up, and I'll let you know if it's working or not. But that is enough for today. And if you are interested in how that played out, I'll have an update probably in the next video, because you can see this workflow is pretty extensive. Thank you very much. My name is Tony. It's been great to have you. If you want to continue following me, I'm going to have more about technical architecture. I'm going to have more about how our deploys are going and what we can do to improve them. I'm going to have how we set up a DNS alias and where we're going to establish that and all of those things. So in the meantime, take care. We'll see you there. Hey, a little bonus footage for you today. Something to think about. When you're using this Terraform-based deployment, you need to consider costs. AWS is going to have costs associated with it. That's a given. The way that I've established this with our 3 Fargate tasks and our NAT gateway, which is just how you connect to the site, with our RDS and Elasticache and these things that are good for your future work development and general life cycle of an app, are going to cost. What I've hosted right now could run me between $135 and $155 per month. We're also talking subscription to host on Cloudflare, which is a $10 a month fee, and other things that we're paying for in the course of this work. I'm accepting that cost as a cost of doing business and promoting and making this a viable tool. But it's very important to think about this before you start deploying these things with these advanced features into AWS. If you wanted to cut costs, EC2 is still cheaper, but will still cost. So when you are going through this process, and this is something that I might be able to productionalize and I'm going to actually put out in the real world and have people tool with it, see if they get into it, see if we get adoption for it. When that happens and I can start making money off of it, then it's more viable for me to do things like hosting on a separate region. But right now, with this degree of costs, we're going to maintain this in a single region, and we're going to continue to let it live until I have some adoption. And the nice thing about Amazon, even though they're expensive, is that when we want to say, I'm done with this, I don't want to pay this fee, we're not seeing positive results and dividends, it's fairly straightforward for you to remove that setup. But something to keep in mind before you use Terraform to do your entire production build is to establish what that cost is going to look like, and if there's anything you can do to make it maybe less efficient, less effective, but more cost efficient. Okay.